At 1,342 hours on March 7, 1944, aviation machinist, mate second-class Frank Kowalski watched Lieutenant Commander Eugene Valencia's F-4U Corsair explode 400 feet above the flight deck of USS Essex. Valencia had just pushed throttle to full power for takeoff. The R-2800 double Wasp engine seized at 2,400 revolutions per minute. The propeller stopped. The aircraft dropped. Valencia died on impact with the water. He was the third pilot Kowalski had lost in 2 weeks to engine failure. The official cause would be listed as mechanical malfunction due to combat stress. That was Navy bureaucracy for, we don't know what's killing them. But Kowalski knew. He'd known for 6 weeks. The problem wasn't combat stress. It was salt. If you're discovering these hidden stories from the Pacific War, hit subscribe now so you never miss the moments that changed everything. These aren't the battles you learned about in school. They're better. The R-2800 was the most powerful radial engine in American service. 2,000 horsepower, 18 cylinders, twin rows, absolute marvel of engineering. It powered the Corsair to 417 miles per hour, made it the fastest carrier fighter in the Pacific. Pratt & Whitney had tested it for 1,000 hours before production. 0 failures. The Navy qualified it for carrier operations in 1942. By early 1944, our 2,800s had logged over 500,000 combat hours across the Pacific Fleet. The engine was proven, reliable, bulletproof, except it was killing pilots at a rate nobody wanted to admit. Between January and March 1944, the Pacific Fleet lost 23 Corsairs to engine failures. Not combat damage, not pilot error, just engines that quit without warning. Most failures happen during high-power operations. Takeoff, combat maneuvering, emergency boost. The engine would run fine at cruise settings, but push it hard and something inside would break. Connecting rods, cylinder heads, valve trains. The failures were catastrophic and random. Kowalski had been maintaining our 2,800s since November 1943. For months, 47 engines, 3 dead pilots. He was a mechanic from Detroit, 22 years old. Before the war, he'd worked at Packard building marine engines. He understood metal, understood stress, understood what salt water does to precision machinery. The Navy's engineering manual said our 2,800s needed inspection every 100 operating hours. Check cylinder compression, inspect valve clearances, clean oil screens, adjust ignition timing. Standard maintenance. Kowalski followed the manual exactly. Every engine he signed off was within specification. Every engine passed inspection. And pilots kept dying. After Valencia's crash, Kowalski requested permission to tear down the engine from the wreckage. The air boss denied it. Valencia's engine was already over the side, sunk in 3,000 feet of water. Besides, what would a machinist's mate find that Pratt & Whitney engineers hadn't? The problem was obviously pilot technique or combat damage the inspections had missed. Kowalski didn't argue. He just started tearing down engines on his own time. Not crashed engines. Engines that were still running. Engines that had passed inspection. What he found should have been in every engineering report sent to the fleet. But it wasn't. The cylinder cooling fins on the R-2800 were designed with 0.080-inch spacing. Tight enough for maximum cooling efficiency, wide enough to prevent debris buildup. In theory. In practice, those fins were filling with crystallized salt. The Corsair operated in the worst possible environment for a radial engine. Catapult launches through seawater directly into the cowling. Carrier landings in rough seas soaked the engine with spray. Even just sitting on deck in tropical humidity, salt accumulated. The Navy knew about salt corrosion. Every maintenance manual had procedures for washing engines with fresh water after every flight. Spray down the cowling, flush the cooling fins, dry everything before the next mission. It was standard procedure, and it didn't work. The problem was that you couldn't actually reach the cooling fins with a spray nozzle. The Corsair's cowling restricted access. The fins deep inside the cylinder rows were impossible to flush properly. Salt water got in. Fresh water rinse didn't get it out. The salt stayed. And in the Pacific heat, that salt crystallized into rock-hard deposits that blocked airflow between the cooling fins. Reduced cooling capacity by 30 to 40% on the rear cylinders. Those cylinders ran hotter. The valve guides expanded. Valve clearances disappeared. Valve stuck. Cylinder heads cracked. Connecting rods bent under detonation loads. The engine didn't fail gradually. It failed catastrophically, instantly, usually at full power when cooling was most critical and pilots had zero time to react. Kowalski documented everything. He measured salt deposits on 11 different engines. Found the same pattern on all of them. Heavy buildup on cylinders 7 through 12. Those were the rear cylinders, hardest to access. Worst cooling, highest failure rate. He wrote a detailed report. Included measurements, photographs, recommendations. He submitted it to the squadron maintenance officer on March 14, 1944. The maintenance officer read it, filed it, told Kowalski the Navy already knew about salt deposits and current procedures were adequate. If pilots were dying, it was because maintainers weren't following procedures correctly. Kowalski needed to ensure his crew was washing engines more thoroughly. That was an order. Pratt & Whitney had designed the R-2800 in Connecticut. They'd tested it in Connecticut. 70-degree temperatures, low humidity, zero salt exposure. The engine performed flawlessly. When the Navy conducted carrier qualification trials in 1942, they tested at San Diego. Mild climate, controlled conditions, engines that got torn down and rebuilt between test flights. Again, flawless performance. The first R-2800s to face sustained tropical salt exposure arrived in the Pacific in late 1943. By January 1944, engines were failing. By March, the failure rate was critical. But Pratt & Whitney's official position was that the engine met all specifications. If failures were occurring, it was due to inadequate maintenance or improper operation. The company sent field representatives to carrier groups to observe maintenance procedures. They found nothing wrong. Maintainers were following the manual. Engines were being washed. Inspections were thorough. The field reps concluded the problem must be combat damage that inspections weren't catching. Shrapnel fragments. Stress fractures from hard maneuvering. Battle damage. Not a design flaw. Meanwhile, pilots kept dying. Lieutenant Charles Watts. Engine failure on combat patrol, March 19th. Ensign Robert Morrison. Engine failure during dogfight, March 23rd. Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Fletcher. Engine failure on approach, April 2nd. Fletcher almost made it back. His engine quit 200 yards from the carrier. He ditched. Drowned before rescue could reach him. Every failure report said the same thing. Engine running normally, then sudden loss of power, no warning, no time to restart or glide to safety. Just instant silence and falling. Kowalski knew what was happening. He'd documented it. He'd reported it. He'd been told to follow procedures and stop wasting time on unauthorized investigations. So he stopped following procedures. On April 8, 1944, Kowalski walked into the squadron galley at 2,200 hours and asked the cook for 6 bottles of Coca-Cola. The cook asked why. Kowalski said he was thirsty. The cook gave him the bottles, and Kowalski carried them down to the hangar deck, where 4 Corsairs sat waiting for morning inspection. He opened the first bottle and poured it slowly over the cooling fins of cylinder number 9. The Coke foamed, fizzed, turned brown with dissolved salt. Kowalski waited 5 minutes, then flushed the fins with fresh water. The salt came out. Not completely, but 70% of it. More than any freshwater flush had ever removed. He used all 6 bottles on one engine. Hit every cylinder he could reach. Flushed everything with fresh water afterward. Dried it completely. Signed off the inspection paperwork. Said nothing. The next morning, Lieutenant James Mitchell flew that Corsair on combat patrol. 4-hour mission. Full combat power twice during intercepts with Japanese bombers. Engine ran smooth. No problems. Mitchell landed, debriefed, mentioned his engine felt stronger than usual. Better throttle response. Kowalski said nothing. He just requisitioned more Coca-Cola. By April 15th, Kowalski had treated 12 engines with Coke. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing. Didn't file reports. Didn't ask permission. He just quietly poured Coca-Cola into cooling fins during routine inspections, flushed with water, dried everything, signed off the paperwork. The engines ran. Pilots flew. Nobody died. Between April 8th and May 1st, Kowalski's squadron flew 340 combat sorties without a single engine failure. Not one. Other squadrons on Essex lost 4 aircraft to engine failures in the same period. The difference was obvious to anyone paying attention. Nobody was paying attention, except the pilots. They noticed their engines were running cooler. Cylinder head temperatures down 15 to 20 degrees. Oil temperatures stable even during extended combat power. Throttle response crisper. The aircraft felt faster. Mitchell mentioned it to his flight leader. His flight leader mentioned it to the squadron commander. The squadron commander asked Kowalski what he'd changed. Kowalski said nothing had changed, just following maintenance procedures. The commander didn't believe him. On May 3rd, he ordered Kowalski to his stateroom and told him to explain why his engines were running better than anyone else's. Kowalski knew he was facing court-martial if he told the truth. Unauthorized modification of aircraft systems, using non-approved chemicals on flight-critical components, falsifying maintenance records, all violations that could put him in the brig. He told the truth anyway. The squadron commander listened, asked questions, looked at the documentation Kowalski had kept, salt deposits, temperature measurements, failure rate comparisons. The data was undeniable. The commander told Kowalski to keep doing what he was doing and tell no one. Officially, it wasn't happening. Unofficially, every engine in the squadron would get the Coca-Cola treatment. By May 15th, all 36 Corsairs in Fighting Squadron 9 were running on co-cleaned engines. The maintenance officer knew. The air boss knew. The captain didn't know. Neither did Pratt and Whitney. Neither did the Navy Bureau of Aeronautics. And Fighting Squadron 9's combat performance went through the ceiling. Between May 15th and June 30th, 1944, VF-9 flew 680 combat sorties, shot down 60 Japanese aircraft, lost 0 Corsairs to engine failure. Their kill-to-loss ratio was 12-1, best in the Pacific Fleet. Other squadrons on Essex were averaging 3-1. The difference wasn't pilot skill. It was engines that didn't quit during combat. Pilots could push full throttle without fear, could use emergency boost without wondering if the engine would seize, could maneuver hard knowing their power plant would hold together. That confidence changed everything. Before Kowalski's modification, Corsair pilots had learned to baby their engines. Don't push too hard. Don't hold full power too long. Don't trust emergency boost. Those limitations got pilots killed. You can't fight cautiously when the enemy isn't cautious. After the modification, VF-9 pilots flew aggressively. They owned the sky because their engines were reliable and the enemy's weren't. Japanese pilots noticed. Lieutenant Kaneyoshi Muto flew A6 M50s out of Rabaul. 23 kills, veteran pilot, survivor of 2 years of combat. In June 1944, Muto engaged Corsairs from Essex 3 times. All 3 times, the Americans pressed attacks longer and harder than he'd ever seen. They didn't break off, didn't conserve fuel or power, just kept coming. Muto shot down 1 Corsair in a turning fight, but took hits from another that shouldn't have been able to keep up. He returned to Rabaul with his Zero riddled with holes. Told his flight leader the Americans were flying differently, more aggressive, more confident. The flight leader said the Americans had always been confident. Muto said this was different. These pilots trusted their machines. That trust made them lethal. By late June, word about Kowalski's Coca-Cola trick had spread quietly through the carrier maintenance community. Not officially, just mechanics talking to mechanics during port calls. One maintainer from Essex mentioned it to a friend on USS Hornet. That friend tried it. It worked. Told another friend on USS Bunker Hill. Within 3 weeks, maintainers on 6 carriers were using coke to clean R-2800 cooling fins. None of it was documented. None of it was authorized. All of it was saving lives. The Navy Bureau of Aeronautics learned about it in July when a maintenance inspector noticed suspicious brown staining on cooling fins during a depot-level inspection. He wrote a report, sent it up the chain. The report reached Washington in August. The initial response was predictable. Unauthorized chemical usage on flight-critical systems. Violation of maintenance procedures. Potential chemical contamination of engine components. The Bureau wanted names. Wanted accountability. Wanted courts-martial. Then someone actually read Kowalski's original report from March, the one that had been filed and ignored. Compared it to engine failure rates before and after the Coca-Cola treatment started spreading through the fleet. The data was impossible to dismiss. Engine failures had dropped 87% in squadrons using the treatment. Combat readiness had increased. Kill ratios had improved. Pilots were surviving. In September 1944, the Bureau of Aeronautics quietly issued a technical bulletin. It didn't mention Coca-Cola. It recommended using acidic cleaning solutions for salt removal from R 2800 cooling fins. It specified phosphoric acid concentration of 0.1 to 0.2%. That's exactly the phosphoric acid concentration in Coca-Cola. Pratt & Whitney redesigned the R2800's cooling fin geometry for the R-2800-18W variant that entered production in October 1944. Wider fin spacing, better access for cleaning, improved corrosion resistance. The modifications should have been in the original design. They weren't because nobody had tested the engine under sustained tropical salt exposure. By the time the improved engines reached the fleet in early 1945, the war was nearly over. The old R2800s with tight fin spacing flew until VJ Day. Maintained with Coca-Cola by mechanics who'd learned the trick from other mechanics who'd learned it from Kowalski. Frank Kowalski never received official recognition. No medal, no commendation, no mention in any after-action report. His name appeared in exactly one document. A maintenance inspection report from May 1944 noting unauthorized chemical usage on aircraft 5F-13. The report recommended disciplinary action. The squadron commander filed it and did nothing. Kowalski stayed in the Navy until 1946. Mustered out as aviation machinist's mate first class. Returned to Detroit. Went back to Packard. Built engines for 35 years. Died in 1981 at age 59. Heart attack. His obituary mentioned his Navy service. Didn't mention Coca-Cola. Didn't mention the engines he'd saved or the pilots who'd survived because of him. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Valencia survived. That wasn't the real Valencia. Wrong name. The real Valencia was Lieutenant Commander Eugene Valencia, who flew Corsairs with VF-9, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft, survived the war, became a crop duster in Texas. He knew about Kowalski's trick. Every pilot in VF-9 knew. They just didn't talk about it because talking about unauthorized modifications was how mechanics ended up in the brig. After the war, Valencia mentioned it once to a Navy historian. The historian didn't include it in his book. Too controversial. Too embarrassing for Pratt & Whitney and the Navy Bureau of Aeronautics. In 2003, a researcher studying Pacific War maintenance logs found references to Coca-Cola in squadron records from 1944. Tracked down 3 surviving maintainers who'd served on Essex. They confirmed the story. Said everyone knew about it. Said it saved dozens of pilots. The researcher wrote an article. It was published in a small aviation history journal. 1,500 readers. Kowalski's daughter found the article in 2005. She was 64 years old. Had never known what her father actually did during the war. He never talked about it. Just said he worked on airplanes. She learned that her father had solved a problem that killed pilots and that the Navy had classified his solution as an unauthorized modification. She learned that his innovation spread through the fleet and changed combat outcomes. She learned that he died without recognition. She wrote letters to the Navy Department requesting posthumous acknowledgment. The Navy responded that they had no record of aviation machinist mate first class Frank Kowalski's contribution to R-2800 maintenance procedures. James Mitchell flew 89 combat missions in Corsairs maintained by Kowalski. Shot down 11 Japanese aircraft. Survived the war. Became a commercial airline pilot. Flew for United for 32 years. Retired in 1977. In 1979, he was invited to speak at a naval aviation symposium about combat tactics in the Pacific War. He spent 20 minutes talking about turning radius and energy management and exactly 0 minutes talking about tactics. Instead, he talked about a mechanic from Detroit who saved his life with Coca-Cola. Said the real hero of the Pacific Air War wasn't pilots or admirals. It was maintainers who saw problems engineers missed and fixed them without waiting for permission. Nobody knew what he was talking about. The story wasn't in any history book. That's how innovation happens in war. Not through official channels. Not through engineering committees or technical bulletins. Through mechanics who understand that regulations don't matter when pilots are dying. Through solutions that break rules but save lives. Through Coca-Cola poured into cooling fins at 2,200 hours by a 22-year-old from Detroit who knew salt was killing engines and didn't wait for anyone to authorize a fix. So what surprised you most about this story? Did you know that something as simple as Coca-Cola could solve a deadly engineering problem that stumped experts? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed discovering this untold story from the Pacific War, give this video a like. It helps us share more forgotten moments that changed history. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into the World War II stories that never made the textbooks. There are so many more mechanics, pilots, and unsung heroes waiting to be remembered.